Daniel Grimes, thanks for joining us from Washington again, and pleased to be back with you as we bring another segment of reporting from Medill News Service. And we're going to take a look at one of the freshman members. This is one of the largest freshman class in many years up in Congress, and Illinois has a few, and one of those is Chuy Garcia that Daniel went out and had an interview with recently. And I'll note to the viewers, the whole interview runs about 11 minutes. We'll air that entire interview for you right after we speak with Daniel a bit about it. And Daniel, it was nice that you had a chance to sit down with Congressman Garcia. What were some of the impressions you carried away?
Well, thank you for having me, Terry. This was quite an opportunity to speak with the freshman congressman. We chatted a lot about his legislative priorities, and it was actually interesting that he didn't mention the Mueller report at all. So he actually seemed to be aligned with the Democratic Party. And in fact, in a recent Fox News poll, the top priority for the Democratic Party was Medicare, the second was renewable energy sources, and the last was free college tuition. And so that was a pretty recent Fox News poll. He mentioned two of the three of those as some of his priorities, and so he seems to be listening to the people he's representing.
Well, I think you asked him about his priorities, and we have a clip of that. Let's take a listen.
So among my legislative priorities is to bring down the cost of health care and especially prescription drugs. This is one of our priorities as a new majority in the House of Representatives. We're also taking measures to address climate change in our country and protect the environment. I'm concerned about violence in my district and in the Chicagoland area. We have passed legislation that would force background checks, universal background checks across the country, so that if people are hot under the collar and want to purchase a gun to prevent needless death. And of course, I have stood against the president's anti-immigrant agenda, from the declaration of an emergency at the border to his mistreatment of people seeking an opportunity to make their case for political asylum. And of course, we have introduced legislation to provide young people known as dreamers in our country a pathway to legalize their status and to become U.S. citizens.
Interesting, Daniel, and we appreciate the Congressman again taking the time to speak with us in his offices up on Capitol Hill. When you talked about him, and I believe you talked about in your 11-minute or so interview about quite a number of things, including, I think, some of the immigration along the border and whether or not there's a crisis. I think, if I know right, Congressman Garcia is one of those who thinks that the president is wrong in his determination that there is a crisis along the border. Did he spend a lot of time on that?
He did. In fact, he mentioned that he feels the president is just using race and using immigration as a cudgel to basically red meat to the base, is what he said. So he doesn't think that there isn't a problem at the border. He thinks that we should, the Congress should work to pass dreamer legislation, and Congress should work to help those undocumented immigrants in the country, seek refuge and get citizenship. And so he really kind of rebuked the president. He thinks the president is all running towards the base, and that he seems to be in alignment with a lot of the Democratic Party and with his Speaker Nancy Pelosi in saying so.
Yeah, well, there's obviously the president has any number of critics within the Democratic caucus, and that is probably going to just be continuing, it seems like, until at least after the November election, and then who knows what happens. Hopefully they can manage to get some things done. And speaking of getting some, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I will say that it was interesting that, he did mention immigration, but a lot of the other things that he talked about really were things like healthcare, which is what the Democrats ran on in 2018, and things like getting things done with affordable housing. And so he did seem to note that a lot of the party isn't there for these kind of hot topics that the media likes to talk about. A lot of the party wants Congress to get there and to get stuff done. And so he seemed to kind of recognize that as well.
It's interesting you say that. We had comments by Congresswoman Sherry Bustos of Illinois, and she spoke at the City Club of Chicago earlier this week. And in her comments, she was saying somewhat much the same thing, that a lot of the coverage at the national level is focusing on the fight between Democrats and the president over the Mueller report, etc. But that, in her opinion, it was hiding some of the real work of Congress that she said was going on by the majority of Congress people. So I hope that's true. It does seem, when you're not in Washington, that there's very little getting done up there. Did Congressman Chuy Garcia express any frustration over that, or what was his take on the atmosphere of Capitol Hill?
Well, he mentioned mainly that, he started, him and all of the 100 other freshmen. So there were 101 freshmen in this 116th Congress. And he mentioned that all of them started during a government shutdown. And so it was kind of tough to get stuff done because the government was mired in this shutdown. Congress wasn't working. And so he thought, well, as soon as Congress the government opened up in February, it's time to get down to business. And he mentioned that. He said that Democrats moved right away to pass sweeping gun control legislation, and this pretty historic legislation that has now moved to the Senate.
And I think we have a bite coming up. The congressman was talking about some of the disadvantaged communities, and one of his priorities or areas of focus that he wants to look at is reinvesting in those communities. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. He talked a little bit about the communities in Illinois and other rural communities that aren't really getting helped out right now, and what he wants to do to help those disenfranchised.
Well, let's take a look at the congressman's comments, and again, to our viewers, the full interview will be available after our conversation here. Here's a little bit of Congressman Chuy Garcia's comments.
As a member of the Financial Services Committee, I am very interested in ensuring that we do not have a repeat scenario such as the one that led to the great financial meltdown in 2008 that almost caused a depression, and a global depression at that. We're holding Wall Street accountable. The 7 largest financial institutions have come before the committee. We want to know what steps they're taking to ensure that that doesn't happen again, that they don't engage in risky investments and business practices, that we protect consumers so that they're not sold harmful products, financial products at that. And we're also asking the large financial institutions what commitments they're making to investing in underserved, disinvested areas of the country, and many urban areas in particular, where the disinvestment has caused the concentration of poverty, a segregation of people, and that has been harmful to families.
Interesting, Daniel, that he would say that. It would be great if we could get some more investment into these communities, and maybe with the growth of the economy, that can happen.
Well, and one thing that Democrats have, attacked is this pay disparity in this country between executives and workers. And so there were actually, when the 7 banks came before Congress last month, their CEOs were grilled about, the CEOs included the CEO of Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, the Goldman Sachs, all the 7 largest banks on Wall Street. They were grilled about the lack of diversity. They were also grilled about the pay disparity between the CEOs and the workers. And so while no meaningful legislation came out of that, it was important for the Congress people, to note that the workers on Wall Street aren't making as much as those CEOs.
Well, we're going to run the full interview now with Congressman Garcia, and it's good for all of us to have some idea. All of these members, just to point out the obvious, are representing those districts, and not all the districts across the breadth of America are are the same. You know, they're very different, and the diversity of those districts is represented by those that they send to Congress. And so it's good for all of us to have a feel when we later hear somebody like Congressman Garcia or any of the others, that we can have some kind of an understanding about who they are and where they're coming from relative to what they're doing for their district.
Yeah, and I hope to continue to do more reporting with talking to the other members of the Illinois congressional, body, and getting more of that reporting here for the Illinois channel.
Well, we hope to do that. It's very good for us back in Illinois to be able to connect it and get a better sense of a little bit, as you did here, a little bit of behind the scenes, sometimes talking with the congressmen in their office. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your reporting, and we'll look forward to doing another one very soon. So thank you, Daniel Grimes.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, take care.
So the first 100 days were very interesting because we spent a lot of time and energy reopening the government. As a matter of fact, on the first day after being sworn in, I voted on a bill to reopen the government, thus cutting short my swearing-in ceremony with family and friends here on the Hill. So we're playing catch-up for the first couple of months after that first very notable swearing-in period. But we are now working hard on a variety of issues that pertain to the real life conditions of Americans. And of course, we're trying to improve the quality of life of people across our country.
So can you tell us about some of the legislation that you're planning now that the government's been open, some of that legislation you're planning?
So among my legislative priorities is to bring down the cost of health care, and especially prescription drugs. This is one of our priorities as a new majority in the House of Representatives. We're also taking measures to address climate change in our country and protect the environment. I'm concerned about violence in my district and in the Chicagoland area. We have passed legislation that would force background checks, universal background checks across the country, so that if people are hot under the collar and want to purchase a gun to prevent needless death. And of course, I have stood against the president's anti-immigrant agenda, from the declaration of an emergency at the border to his mistreatment of people seeking an opportunity to make their case for political asylum. And of course, we have introduced legislation to provide young people known as dreamers in our country a pathway to legalize their status and to become U.S. citizens. So these are among the legislative priorities that I have filed on as sponsor or co-sponsor of bills in the Congress, again, as part of our For the People agenda of Democrats in the U.S. Congress.
Well, you mentioned President Trump's emergency declaration. Can you talk? And that is one way President Trump is trying to supersede Congress's authority. Can you talk about how you are prepared to kind of battle with President Trump to ensure that Congress can maintain an equal branch?
Well, the Congress has rejected, the House has rejected the president's declaration of a national emergency at the border. We have done it because we are seeking to address the need to fix, to replace a broken immigration system that will create an orderly process for people to have a pathway to legalize their status, especially the 2.5 million young people who are virtual Americans, other than having been born in another country, but brought to this country as children. And there is very strong support across the country by the American public for creating a pathway to legalization of these young people and ultimate citizenship. Those are the priorities of a broken immigration system that we're seeking to change. The president playing electoral politics to woo his base, to keep his base unified and energized, is what the emergency declaration is all about. There are not sufficient indicators that there is a crisis at the border. And while he declares an emergency, he also takes very contradictory steps to cut off important assistance to Central American countries that are responsible for most of the people who are coming to the border because of deteriorating conditions in their country having to do with political violence, with gang violence in those areas, or with climate change that is forcing people to move from where they've lived, where they cannot make a living anymore, and coming to this country seeking an opportunity to present their case for political asylum. That is the emergency at the border. It isn't an invasion of criminal elements of people who are seeking to come to cause harm to our country. These are children and women, their moms, and sometimes other family members who simply want an opportunity to be heard and to see if they merit political asylum.
Well, and switching gears here a little bit, when you were elected, you said, after finding out that you're going to be on the House Financial Services Committee, and we should note that the head of that committee, Representative Maxine Waters, personally sought you out for that, which is pretty commendable. You said an appointment to the powerful House Financial Services Committee ensures that that the Chicagoans I represent will have a voice in shaping important banking and housing policy. So you talked a little bit about the background checks with guns. Are you going to be targeting any specific housing or any specific banking policies?
As a member of the Financial Services Committee, I am very interested in ensuring that we do not have a repeat scenario such as the one that led to the great financial meltdown in 2008 that almost caused a depression, and a global depression at that. We're holding Wall Street accountable. The 7 largest financial institutions have come before the committee. We want to know what steps they're taking to ensure that that doesn't happen again, that they don't engage in risky investments and business practices, that we protect consumers so that they're not sold harmful products, financial products at that. And we're also asking the large financial institutions what commitments they're making to investing in underserved, disinvested areas of the country, and many urban areas in particular, where the disinvestment has caused the concentration of poverty, a segregation of people, and that has been harmful to families. So we're taking steps additionally to address homelessness in America, the great shortage and disinvestment in affordable housing for families that's needed in both rural areas of the country as well as in urban areas like Chicago, LA, New York, and many other cities. And we're putting forth proposals that would create affordable housing, stimulate the economy, and help build healthier, walkable, sustainable communities. So the role of the Financial Services Committee is a very important one. We're also talking about renewing the Community Reinvestment Act, which would help ensure that communities that haven't had investment finally get investment so that they have an opportunity to build housing, to create jobs, to provide people in those communities with greater opportunities, and to connect them with good transit so that they can go to work, they can study, they have greater mobility, and are not financially isolated in their condition.
Well, and we're going to talk a little bit about your committee. This is the last question, but the House, President Trump is currently suing to stop the disclosure of his tax records. And the head of your committee, Maxine Waters, has said that, that's terrible. He's trying to stop, the Congress's power. Can you talk about what your committee is prepared to do to ensure that you can obtain access to those records?
Well, we have, the chair has issued subpoenas requesting that information. The Congress has a constitutional duty to hold the executive accountable to see if there was any wrongdoing. We want information from Deutsche Bank, from Capital One. These are the companies that have financed many of the president's business interests over a long period of time. We're seeking to know if there are any conflicts of interest, and we have a right as a Congress, as a branch of government, to examine these records to ensure that the best interests of the country are being upheld. So this is among the purview of the Committee on Financial Services, and we are exercising it as we have every constitutional right to do so.
Awesome, Congressman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Everyone, do you mind? I don't need to Congressman.